The wind cut across the ridges like a serrated blade, dragging clouds of crimson dust through the dying light. On Carith 7, storms were as common as breath, and tonight's rolled over the plains with the weight of a world eager to swallow its last settlers. Cale Draven trudged back from the water trench, shoulders aching from dragging the stubborn hose that leaked more than it carried. His lamp flickered in the thickening dusk, and his boots scraped against crystalline shards that could slice open skin with one wrong step. He muttered curses under his breath. The storm had broken earlier than forecast, and now the horizon danced with streaks of red lightning that twisted like veins across the sky. Cale carried nothing but the lamp and the short, battered blade on his hip. The rifle stayed back at his shelter, a Stellan polycrete module patched together from years of scavenging. Alone, it was enough. Or so he thought. The ridge ahead shifted with movement. At first he told himself it was only the tricks of the storm, shadows bending and shattering with the lightning. But then he saw them. Two small figures crouched under a jagged overhang of stone, perfectly still as though the storm itself had carved them there. Cale froze. His gut clenched. Children, at least, they resembled children. Their forms were thin, skeletal almost, wrapped in cloth burned and frayed at the edges. Their skin gleamed pale silver, traced with faint glowing lines that pulsed weakly, like embers gasping for air. One, the elder, no older than 10 by human guess, met his gaze head-on. Her dark, burning eyes carried defiance in a body trembling from weakness. The younger clung to her side, smaller, fragile, her lip quivering as she tried and failed to appear brave. Cale's hand brushed the hilt of his blade before reason stopped him. These weren't raiders or scouts. Just two alien girls alone on a planet that ate the unprepared alive. Yet his mind churned with warnings. Two unregistered Xeno children meant trouble. Corporations would cage them, dissect them, brand them as property. Scavenger gangs would do worse. He could walk away. Pretend he never saw them. That was the smart choice. He'd survived this long by minding his own. But Cale Draven knew too well the cost of walking away from the helpless. Ghosts of his past reminded him nightly. Slowly, he crouched. He lowered his lamp so its glow softened and spoke in a voice steady though his chest hammered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The elder's thin arms locked tighter around her sister. Her eyes never blinked. The younger whimpered but made no sound. Cale unshouldered his canvas pack and placed it on a flat stone between them. He opened the flap, deliberate, every motion clear, and laid out what little he had, 2 foil-wrapped ration bars, a dented flask of water, a strip of dried jerky. He slid it forward. "Take it," he murmured. For a long breath, nothing. Then the elder darted out a trembling hand, snatched the flask, and pulled it back. They shared in desperate gulps, coughing but drinking greedily. The bars disappeared in frantic bites, the elder forcing herself to eat slower so her sister got more. Cale stayed still, letting the storm lash behind him. Watching them, he felt something heavy shift in his chest. He hadn't realized how empty his shelter had been until he saw these sparks of life huddled in the dust. When they finished, the elder met his gaze once more. Her eyes softened just a fraction, enough for him to wonder if she might speak. Instead, she gave a sharp nod, half gratitude, half warning. Then she pulled her sister up, and together they slipped back into the storm's darkness. Cale sat there, rain pelting his shoulders, words caught in his throat. He almost called after them. Almost. The next morning, he returned with another bundle of food and water. At first the ridge was empty, then he saw it, a symbol scratched into the dirt, a jagged circle split down the middle. Not human writing. A sign. He left the bundle and walked away. The pattern repeated. Each day he left supplies. Each morning, a new sign appeared, etched with more confidence. Once, the younger left a strip of crystal thread tied in a knot. Cale held it under the lamplight that night, the shimmer faint but alive, and tucked it into a tin on the shelf beside his bed. They never let him see them again, but he felt their eyes. Watching from the rocks, silent, cautious. Days turned to weeks, and their signs became familiar, a hidden language between them. Then one morning, they were gone. No symbol in the dirt, not even a trace. The last marks erased clean. Cale told himself they'd found their people. That they were safe. But the ache in his chest said otherwise. That night, for the first time in years, he dreamed not of silence, but of two small shadows under stone, waiting to be seen. Seasons spun across Carith, 7 like knives. Cale grew harder, his shelter stronger, but the strip of crystal thread remained on the shelf above his bed. 15 winters carved scars across his skin, but that fragile gift reminded him that once, someone had needed him. He didn't know fate was already circling back. He didn't know the storm was preparing to return, not with silence this time, but with two shadows grown into warriors. The storm arrived at sundown, rolling in from the western ridge with the same restless hunger Cale Draven had known all his years on Carith, 7. He sat by lantern light in his cabin, sharpening the teeth of a broken mining saw, the rasp of metal against stone keeping him company. Rain drummed on the polycrete roof, steady, unrelenting. He poured himself a tin cup of bitter brew and let his gaze drift toward the shelf by his bed. The small tobacco tin sat there, worn smooth from years of touch. Inside rested the strip of crystal thread left by the children so long ago. 15 winters had not dimmed its shimmer, nor the questions it whispered. 2 knocks struck the door. Not frantic. Not timid. Deliberate. Cale froze. Nobody came this far into the wastes without reason, and reasons were usually trouble. He slid the saw aside and let his hand hover near the rifle leaning against the wall. The knocks came again. Boots creaked as he crossed the steel floor, heart pounding against the rhythm of rain. He set his hand against the latch and pulled the door open. 2 figures stood framed against the storm. Tall now. Broad-shouldered. Cloaks clung to their bodies, heavy with rain. Strange exo-armor hugged them like a second skin, its surface etched with faint, glowing patterns that pulsed like living fire. Recognition hit Cale so hard his breath caught. The tilt of a jaw, the set of a pair of eyes, the way one figure half-shadowed herself behind the other. Lyra and Celine. The alien children from the ridge. But no longer children. Cale stepped back wordlessly, and they entered, bringing with them the sharp scent of wet stone and ozone. The elder, Lyra, unfolded a small bundle and placed it on his table. Inside lay a strip of crystal thread woven and knotted in a pattern that shimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Cale crossed the room in a rush, pulled down his old tin, and laid his thread beside theirs. The 2 pieces caught the light together, glowing like echoes across years. Celine's eyes softened. Lyra only nodded, sharp, decisive. "You survived," Cale said, his voice rough. Lyra met his gaze with the same defiance she'd carried as a child. No answer came, because none was needed. They ate in silence. Bread and beans, like he'd offered so long ago. Their movements were different now, practiced, deliberate, but he recognized the same urgency beneath their calm. Kale watched them as he had all those years before, careful not to intrude, but unable to look away. Later, when it came time to rest, Kale unrolled his blanket on the floor, gesturing to the bed for them. Lyra's expression was unreadable as she settled her sister in, but when Kale lay down, she reached with the edge of her blanket and covered his shoulder. Her hand lingered just long enough for him to feel its warmth. He did not sleep easily. He lay awake, listening to the rhythm of their breathing, realizing this was no chance reunion. Fate had returned them to his door, carrying more than memories. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist clung to the wash like smoke. Lyra coaxed embers back to life in the stove while Celine folded the blanket she had used, setting it neatly on the table. Kale poured coffee and studied them. Both wore armor beneath their cloaks, scarred and scorched by travel. Their hands carried calluses of warriors. They had seen war. Together, they moved through his cabin as though they belonged. The room, for 15 years his solitary refuge, breathed differently now. As the day stretched on, he showed them the spring behind the ridge. Lyra carried the water buckets without effort. Celine followed with her eyes scanning the horizon, every motion careful. Back at the shelter, she took Kale's torn shirt and stitched it without a word. He opened his mouth to tell her it wasn't necessary, then stopped. She knew. She had chosen. By midday, the cabin no longer felt like a hermit's den. It felt like a place shared, lived in. Their cloaks steamed by the stove, the glow of their markings pulsing faintly in rhythm with their breath. Kale caught himself watching too closely. The flex of Lyra's shoulders as she hauled stones. The quiet grace of Celine's fingers as she mended cloth. He forced his eyes away, but the awareness lingered, undeniable. That evening, they sat outside together as the first stars blinked through clearing skies. Lyra's gaze fixed on the road to town, her jaw tight. "Someone looking for you?" Kale asked quietly. Lyra didn't turn. "Not anymore." Her tone was calm, but steel ran through it. Celine met Kale's eyes, gave a small nod, as though confirming what her sister would not admit. They had not come here to pass through. They had come to stay. That night, Kale spread his blanket closer to the bed, not touching, but nearer. In the dark, Celine's hand drifted down, light against his arm, a wordless sign that they were no longer strangers. Kale stared up at the ceiling beams, the weight of 15 lonely years shifting inside him. Whatever storm hunted them, whatever past had carved their scars, it was at his door now. And for the first time, he didn't mind sharing his roof. The third morning after their return dawned still and strangely quiet. No storm, no rattling winds. Just the crystalline ridges burning bright in the sunlight, as if Carith, 7 itself had paused to draw breath. Kale Draven rose early, moving through the rhythm of chores that had once marked his days with silence. But now the cabin was different. Lyra carried the heavy water pails with ease, shoulders flexing beneath her patched armor. Celine swept the floor and set tools in neat rows, her motions precise, almost ritualistic, as though order itself was her defense against the chaos outside. Their presence filled Kale's world with a fragile kind of life, and he found himself watching them more often than he admitted. Celine bent over the woodpile, her hair falling across her cheek. Kale caught himself staring before wrenching his gaze back to the fence post he was repairing. A hermit couldn't afford distraction, but distraction was here all the same. By midday, the shelter no longer felt like an outpost of solitude. It felt like a beginning. And that was when Kale saw the dust rising on the road. 4 riders cresting the ridge. His stomach tightened instantly. Corporate enforcers. They came with rifles slung across their backs and cruelty carved into their faces. One wore a crooked deputy's badge, a trinket of authority, not law. Kale walked slowly to the gate, wiping sweat and dust from his palms. Lyra straightened, braid falling across her shoulder, her eyes narrowing to sharp points. Celine froze, her hands curling into fists. "Morning, settler," the man with the badge called. His voice carried through the hot stillness. "Word is you've got company." Kale's jaw worked once. He didn't move from the gate. "Travelers come and go. No trouble here." The second rider leaned forward, lips curling in a grin too thin to be human. "Funny. Town says 2 alien women came this way. Illegal assets. Corporation property. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The word, property, burned in Kale's ears. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Lyra stepped out, chin high, her markings glowing faintly in the sun. Celine hovered in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, steady but tense. The rider's smirks faltered at the sight. Kale let the silence stretch until it snapped. "They're not wanted here," he said flatly. "And they're not going anywhere." The deputy shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." For a long moment, the air itself seemed to crackle. Lightning waiting to fall. Then the deputy gave a short nod. "If you see anything, you let the town know." The riders turned, hooves kicking up dust as they retreated. Only when their silhouettes vanished did Kale let his chest unclench. Lyra stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his. "They'll return," she said softly, not as a warning but as a certainty. "Maybe," Kale answered, eyes fixed on the empty road. "But they'll find the same answer next time." Inside, Celine let go of the doorframe. Her hands trembled though she tried to hide it. Kale crossed to her and laid a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Instead, for the first time, she gave him a faint smile. That night, Kale left the rifle by the door, not a threat, but a promise. "Door stays unlatched tonight," he said, half to himself. Lyra nodded once, slow and knowing. Celine's gaze lingered longer, her lips curving with the faintest smile. Days blurred after that, tense but alive. The sisters worked beside him, their presence shaping his shelter into something sturdier, more permanent. Lyra lifted beams, her strength steady as iron. Celine stitched curtains from sackcloth, giving the wash corner privacy. Kale expanded the pen and added a second condenser tower. Piece by piece, it became a home for 3. Yet every dawn, Kale scanned the horizon for dust. Trouble was circling. He could feel it. On the 4th evening, it came. This time, the riders brought a 4th man, a polished coat, neat mustache, boots too clean for dust. Corporate. He dismounted with the easy confidence of a man who thought law bent to his coin. "You can't keep unregistered assets," he said coldly. "They belong to the corporation." "They belong to no one," Kale answered. His voice was stone. "This is their home." The man sneered. "You think you can hide them? There are laws." "Show me papers." Kale cut in. Silence. The cabin door opened. Lyra stepped out, her braid loose, markings glowing like fire. Celine followed, blade in hand, her glow softer but no less dangerous. Their presence made the mercenaries hesitate. "You're making a mistake," the corporate man hissed. "Maybe," Kale said. But it's mine to make. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the riders spat dust and turned their mounts. We'll be back, the deputy promised. Kale stood rigid until the sound of hooves faded. Only then did he exhale. Lyra's eyes burned with pride and warning. Celine quietly took the rifle and leaned it against the door at a sharper angle. Ready. That evening, their meal was more than food. It was agreement. The nights that followed deepened the unspoken bond. Celine's laughter came in quick, surprising bursts, drawing Kale's eyes every time. One afternoon, she slipped on wet ground and Kale caught her, their bodies close, her heartbeat quick against his hand. She looked back at him without fear. Later, by firelight, she offered him a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing his. Neither pulled away. Lyra watched. For a moment, Kale braced for anger. Instead, she stepped forward, touched his jaw, and kissed him, steady, claiming. Celine followed, hesitant but sure, her lips soft with promise. No words were spoken. Only silence, only touch, only the lantern burning low as the weight of fate settled around them. For Kale Draven, solitude was over. This was destiny returned, and he would fight for it no matter the cost. The sky had that brittle stillness Kale Draven had learned to fear. Too quiet, too clear, as if the world itself were bracing. He stood by the ridge, scanning the horizon, and there it was, dust plumes rising, not 4 riders this time, but a convoy. 3 crawler trucks armored with welded plates, a dozen riders on hover bikes, drones glinting above like black knives in the sun. Corporate had returned, and this time they weren't asking. Kale's gut tightened, but his hands were steady as he turned back toward the shelter. Lyra was already fastening the plates of her exo-armor, her markings pulsing brighter than fire. Celine gripped a crystal-forged blade, her eyes wide yet steady. They come in numbers, Lyra said, her voice flat. I counted 15, Kale replied. Maybe more. Celine's gaze flicked to him. We cannot outrun them. No, Kale said, sliding a fresh shard cartridge into his rifle. We fight. Lyra's lips curved into a fierce smile. The first plasma bolts hissed into the dirt, scorching the fence. Kale crouched, sighted, fired. A shard burst from his rifle and shattered through a rider's chest plate, flinging him from his bike. The battle had begun. Drones swooped low, sensors glowing red. Celine stepped forward, her markings blazing. A hum filled the air, vibrating through Kale's bones. The nearest drone stuttered, shrieked, and spiraled into the ground in a shower of sparks. You didn't tell me you could do that, Kale muttered. Celine's lips curved faintly. You never asked. Then another drone dropped, cleaved from the sky by her resonance. Lyra vaulted the fence with inhuman speed, her blade arcing with blue fire. She struck a rider down in a single motion, then twisted aside from plasma bolts, her body a blur of precision and fury. Kale fired to cover her, each recoil slamming into his shoulder. The convoy screeched to a halt, mercenaries pouring out with rifles. Plasma fire lit the yard. Kale swung his old mining saw into a merc's chest, sparks showering as steel tore through armor. Behind him, plasma scorched the shelter's wall, fire licking at the roof. Celine, he shouted, pointing. She thrust out her hands, resonance pulsing in a shockwave that snuffed the flames instantly. Kale grinned despite the chaos. Remind me not to make you angry. Her flush was brief, then she cut another drone from the sky. The fight raged. For every merc who fell, 2 more surged forward. Selene staggered, drained, her resonance faltering. Lyra bled from a graze along her arm. Kale's rifle overheated, forcing him into close combat. They couldn't hold forever. Then the corporate man appeared. He stepped from the lead truck, boots polished, coat immaculate. A shock baton crackled in his hand, his smile sharp as a blade. "Enough," he shouted. "Hand over the assets, and I'll let you crawl away with your skin." Kale raised his rifle, sweat dripping into his eyes. "They're not assets. They're my family." The man's smile vanished. "Then you'll die with them." He raised the baton, and mercenaries surged. The world blurred into fire and screams. Kale fought until every muscle screamed, until plasma burned across his side, until his saw was slick with blood. Lyra stood unyielding at his flank, her blade singing arcs of light. Selene faltered to her knees, a rifle aimed at her head. Kale lunged, tackling the merc, the shot searing across his ribs. He ripped the weapon free and smashed it into the man's jaw. Selene looked up at him, tears streaking through the dust. "You'll die for us." Kale pulled her up, gripping her hand. "No. I'll live for you." And then the world changed. The 2 crystal threads, his and theirs, rose from the shelter as though pulled by fate. They twined together in midair, glowing molten silver. The bond awakened. Selene's hand pressed over his heart, Lyra's palm braced his shoulder. Their voices overlapped, alien and human, fierce and ancient. Bondmate. The resonance exploded outward. Drones shattered, mercenaries staggered, weapons splintered, the very ground trembled beneath them. The corporate man was hurled back into the dust, shock twisting his face. His army broke, retreating into chaos, engines roaring away. His shouts of vengeance were drowned by the storm of their flight. Silence fell. Kale stood heaving, scorched and bleeding, but alive. Selene clung to his arm, Lyra at his other side, her blade still dripping. The bond pulsed between them, alive, undeniable. "It's done," Kale rasped. "They won't take you. Not while I stand." Selene lifted her tear-streaked face. "You are ours now." Lyra's lips curved into a fierce smile. "And we are yours." For the first time in his life, Kale Draven did not feel alone. He felt unbreakable. That night they laid the crystal threads on the table, glowing faintly with the rhythm of 3 hearts beating as one. No speeches, no vows, just firelight, hands entwined, and a silent promise. Whatever storms came, corporations or armies, they would face them together. At dawn, Kale stepped outside, the sisters beside him. The sun rose over the crystalline ridges, gold washing the land. For years he had seen only dust and stone. Now it looked alive. Lyra stood tall, hand on her blade. Selene leaned against him, her hair brushing his shoulder. 15 years ago, Kale had offered food to 2 starving children. Now they had given him something greater, a reason to fight, a reason to live, a reason to love. The world called them fugitives. He called them family. And together, they would write a future no one could break. And there you have it, the tale of Kale Draven, Lyra, and Selene, bound together by choice, by battle, and by destiny itself. What began as a lonely scavenger's encounter in a storm grew into something greater, a bond that defied corporations, mercenaries, even the void. On Carith 7, survival was supposed to be the only law. But Kale proved something different. That family can be forged not by blood, but by courage and compassion. The sisters came back not as children in need, but as warriors returning for the one man who had chosen not to walk away. And when the storm of steel and fire fell on them, the bond they shared turned into a weapon stronger than any rifle or drone. Together, they did what none of them could have done alone. They stood, unbroken, and carved their own place in the universe. Stories like this remind us that sometimes, the smallest kindness, sharing water in the dust, or bread in the storm, can ripple through years and return as something far greater than we could ever imagine. Kale didn't know, 15 winters ago, that he was shaping his future with one act of compassion. But destiny has a way of circling back. If you enjoyed this journey through storms, battles, and bonds, make sure to subscribe for more epic sci-fi stories like this one. Don't forget to hit that like button if you felt the power of Kale, Lyra, and Celine stand against the odds. And please share this video with a friend who loves tales of resilience, family, and unbreakable connections forged in the harshest of worlds. Because every story we pass along is another spark, another chance for light in the storm.